Pilate would never consider releasing a prisoner. He killed everybody. In fact, the reason he ended up being promoted to a different town was because at one point he was so mad at the Jews he crucified them from Jerusalem all the way to Damascus. They were on both sides of the road crucified. So he was not a friendly guy, right? You know, so the argument that his wife convinced him to hold this opportunity to release Jesus seems false. And by the way, Barabbas is not a Jewish name. It actually is the title that Jesus was known by, because it means Bar, son of Abbas, who's the father, and Jesus was known as the son of the father. So that story seems false. But there it is. In any case, so Jesus is crucified, tortured, and then crucified, etc. You've probably heard that. That's the crown of thorns, the scourging at the pillar, and of course the crucifixion itself. And there's the whole Stations of the Cross. If you're familiar with the tradition of saying the Rosary, you have all the position stations of the cross. Usually at every church, in fact, I think it's the rule that you have all of them all around, so that you can meditate basically by praying at each of the stations.
So people originally crucified upside down. I remember reading something about Romans crucifying people upside down for a very long time, and then eventually starting to crucify people right side up because it made them die slower.
What killed people normally, and in fact the
Yeah, I thought that Gabriel was crucified upside down.
yeah, I believe it. Peter was also, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I understand that was worse.
I feel like you die faster.
Well, apparently what killed people was not being able to breathe. So this is ridiculous and serious at the same time. This is from the movie The Life of Brian.
Right.
And
they're using ropes.
kind of famous, actually. Even the song is famous. So there you have. It's comedy. And by the way, it wasn't allowed to be shown in England, where they made it.
They're making fun of it.
Yeah. There's such a neat debate between two highly respected Christians, one cardinal or bishop, and then in the English Anglican Church, and then John Cleese and Michael Palin were in this debate, arguing over this, and they were. It's an atrocious thing. This is making fun of the central story of the church, and we're all Christians, etc., and so you're making fun of our religion, etc. And they were arguing, no, it's Brian, it's not Jesus. So, pretty interesting argument, actually. But even though the Nicene Council argued that Arius, the philosophy of Arius, or the beliefs of Arius, the Gnostics, were not acceptable, they didn't go away. And in fact, there's an interesting view that they get repeated quite frequently throughout history. Some of the ones that are famous was the poet John Milton. So if you're familiar with the poem Paradise Lost, John Milton was the secretary for Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was the Lord Protector. Remember, they chopped the head off of King Charles I. And then Oliver Cromwell was offered to be king, and he said, no, we just got rid of being king. No kings here. So he became the Lord Protector instead. And Milton, I have the collected works of John Milton at home because the library threw them out. It was at the Luzak. It was going out to Luzak, and they used to have a bin there where they would put out books that they were getting rid of, and the entire set of John Milton's works was there. What the heck? So, of course, I took them out to my car in about 3 different trips. They were big damn books, you know. However, I've started reading some of them at different times, and it's fascinating because he had to do all the President Trump is upset with you because Oliver Cromwell is upset with you because you've captured some of our British citizens on this ship, etc., to the French, etc. You can imagine that kind of stuff. But Paradise Lost is a poem that's aimed against the papists. Remember, he's a follower of Jesus, but he's a follower of Jesus English style. And the Pope, of course, is in it, in the Vatican, and the papists were enemies. They literally were. The one monk tried to blow up the Queen, actually Parliament, the gunpowder incident, right? You've heard of this? Yes? No? Maybe? The gunpowder plot. Notice, English Roman Catholics, right? Blow up the House of Lords, right? So, Catholics were not appreciated, as you can imagine. And so there was, a big fight over that. Well, in Paradise Lost, turns out that the Pope loves the wrong God. Instead of God being the God that the Pope loves, he loves Satan. And Satan's brother, Jesus, or not Jesus, but God, rather. Sorry, misspoke. But God has been imprisoned by Satan. And so if you worship the God according to the Catholics, you're actually worshiping Satan instead of the real God. There was a neat movie based on this called, the whole series was called Materials. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. These Dark Materials. These were stories where they're trying to rescue God from hell, where Satan has locked God up. So they're actually trying to rescue him. So it actually follows Paradise Lost. So it's kind of neat. They made one movie that came out. I don't think they made the rest of them, but that's the TV series. But there was an original movie that was out. I've never seen the TV series, but kind of neat. Another example of the Gnostics that's still there is the Church of Latter-day Saints. You're familiar with them? They apparently have in their theology many of the same kinds of characteristics that John Milton expresses, and there are others throughout the history of theology. So the Gnostics haven't gone away; they're still there. So that's kind of interesting. Now, if you end up becoming an atheist, atheism means you don't believe in God, right? You don't believe God exists. And I think you really have to be a modern to do that. So for someone to be an atheist, literally, it seems to me, I mean, there were like, Romans that didn't believe in Zeus, and so on. But to not believe in God today, I think is a totally different thing, because what we end up with is a definition of God. Well, I'll just tell you what it is. God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So if you're looked ahead on our syllabus, one of the classes will be on St. Anselm, and St. Anselm is the one in 1100 that gives us that definition. Based on that definition, it seems like it's impossible for God not to exist. Because literally God, by definition, is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So if you can think of something greater than God, and that would be the case if God didn't exist, well, then that's God. Anything you can think of, so if you think the universe is the greatest thing, by definition, in your mind, that is God. By this definition. So to say that you're an atheist means that you don't believe God exists. Well, you're, number one, doing a fallacious argument, because you're arguing that something doesn't exist, and you can never prove the negative in logic. There's no bears in the woods. Well, we can actually go and look through the whole woods. Everybody all walk along. So we can actually do that, I think, because we didn't see a bear. That would work. I don't see why that wouldn't. But I think you're stuck, with the modern definition of God. Everybody has to believe in God. The question becomes, well, what do you think God is? You can be an agnostic, right? Gnosko means, knowledge. And if you're an agnostic, don't believe in a particular knowledge, or in other words, you don't know. Okay, if God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, that's fine, but what does that mean? I don't know, right? You can take that position. That seems to be the most logical position to take if you're critical of the traditional religious conceptions of God. Arguably, right? So agnostic tends to be one of the best. If you're a monotheist, you believe in only one. So that's, of course, the interesting difficulty with Christians, because strictly speaking, you believe in a tripartite God, following the creed. All those creeds, by the way, basically still consider that absolutely essential, that God is those three parts. My favorite explanation for that came from Pope Benedict, who in his writings takes a very modern point of view, and that is that we basically need in our vocabulary an explanation of why everything is here. And, scientists are trying to figure that out, the Big Bang Theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Was it always a Big Bang, or was it like Aristotle, who argues that everything, well, there is evolution in Aristotle, but that's evolution on an individual level, because you're born, you age, and then you die. So the generation and corruption, right? So individuals evolve, but for Aristotle, all of the animals and all of their places in the universe essentially have been there always. So he's not an evolutionary. He thinks that all of this has always remained the same, basically. Plato is kind of the same way, I think. So we're not really going to see evolution in that sense until, well, some of the Romans came up with that, but that's kind of late, relatively speaking. I gotta quit. So a good question, why did the Roman Empire become Christian? Is that interesting? One of the famous books, of course, is the Gibbon book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. You ever heard of that? Decline and Fall? He basically argues that the reason Rome fell was because it became Christian. Because Christians didn't want to fight anymore. They loved one another. And they thought you should love your enemies, you should love, they slap you on the right cheek, you should turn the left, that kind of thing. And as a result, they didn't have enough people to supply for their army anymore to fight the enemies. So of course Rome ended up hiring mercenaries from those enemies, and those enemies all actually became Christian, by the way, and eventually took over Rome. So Rome never really fell. It was taken over by its own mercenaries, essentially. The Goths. And Visigoths. When we look at St. Augustine next time, and please, if you get the chance, read his Confessions. I think I have a link to it, but you should be able to find St. Augustine's Confessions.